What would you do if someone sat across from you at a dinner table, smiled politely, and calmly told your entire family you were losing your mind? Not joking. Not teasing. Not exaggerating. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. A real accusation. One that could destroy your reputation, your independence, even your home. And imagine everyone believing it. Your siblings. Your relatives. Even your own son. Now imagine sitting there, quietly, while they all look at you with pity. Or worse. Doubt. That's exactly what happened to me. But what none of them knew, especially my daughter-in-law, was that I had something in my purse that would change the entire evening. A recording. One she never expected anyone to hear. But before we get to that moment, the moment when I placed my phone on the dinner table and the entire room went silent, you need to understand how this story really started. Because things like this don't happen overnight. They grow slowly. Quietly. Like a crack forming in a wall. At first, you barely notice it. Then one day you realize the entire foundation is shifting. My name is Margaret Bennett. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years teaching high school literature in Charlotte, North Carolina. For most of my life, people described me as organized. Reliable. The kind of person who remembers everyone's birthday. The kind who keeps receipts from 5 years ago just in case. So when someone suddenly starts telling people that you forget things, that you repeat yourself, that you get confused, those words carry weight. Especially when they come from someone inside the family. My son Daniel is 38. He's a good man. Kind. Hardworking. The kind of son every parent hopes they raise. 3 years ago, he married Claire. Claire Bennett. 34. Smart. Polished. Always well dressed. The kind of woman who enters a room and immediately makes everyone feel like she's the most thoughtful person there. At least, that's how she appeared. The first year after their wedding was perfectly normal. Family dinners. Holiday visits. Sunday afternoon coffee. Nothing unusual. But about 6 months ago, something started to change. And I didn't notice it at first. Not really. It began with little comments. Small ones. Claire would say things like, "Margaret, didn't you already tell me that story earlier?" Except I hadn't. Or she would gently laugh and say, "You asked me that question twice today." Again. I hadn't. At first I assumed I must have forgotten. After all, we all repeat ourselves sometimes. But then it started happening more often. Always when Daniel was nearby. That detail mattered. Because when Claire and I were alone together, she never mentioned my memory. Not once. But the moment Daniel walked into the room, suddenly she was correcting me again. "Margaret, you told us that yesterday. Margaret, remember we talked about that already? Margaret, maybe you should write things down." Subtle. Very subtle. So subtle that if you complained about it, you might sound defensive. Or worse. Confused. Have you ever experienced something like that? When someone starts gently rewriting your reality? Where you begin questioning your own memory? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And slowly, almost invisibly, the narrative started spreading. Daniel called me one afternoon. His voice was careful. Concerned. "Mom, have you talked to your doctor recently?" I remember standing in my kitchen when he said that. Just staring at the wall. Because suddenly everything made sense. Claire had been talking about me. Behind my back. Planting seeds. And once those seeds were planted, they began growing. Fast. You see, there's something frightening about accusations involving memory loss. Because once people start believing it, everything you say becomes suspicious. If you defend yourself, they think you're confused. If you stay quiet, they think you're hiding something. Either way, you lose. But the real moment when I realized something was seriously wrong happened 2 weeks before that dinner. A small thing went missing in my house. My spare car keys. I searched everywhere. The kitchen counter. My purse. The hallway table. Nothing. Then the next day Claire came over and suddenly found them. Right there on the coffee table. She smiled kindly and said, "See, Margaret? That's exactly what I was talking about." I stared at those keys. Because I knew something she didn't realize. I had not left them there. That was the first time a thought crossed my mind that made my stomach turn. What if this wasn't a misunderstanding? What if it was deliberate? So I started paying attention. Really paying attention. And once I did, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Things misplaced. Stories twisted. Small mistakes repeated to Daniel later as evidence. Claire was building something. Piece by piece. Carefully. Patiently. Almost like someone assembling a case in court. But the most chilling moment of all happened the night before the family dinner. Claire had come over to help prepare food. We were making roasted chicken and vegetables. At one point she stepped into the living room to make a phone call. She thought I couldn't hear her. She thought I was still in the kitchen. What she didn't realize was that my phone was sitting on the counter, recording a recipe video I had started earlier. And her voice carried clearly through the doorway. At first I wasn't paying attention. But then I heard something that made me freeze. Claire laughed. A short, sharp laugh. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. Once everyone believes she's losing her memory, Daniel can finally sell the house. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, listening. Because what she said next would explain everything. But the truth about that phone call, the thing Claire thought no one would ever hear, is exactly why the next night, at the dinner table, when she stood up and told my entire family I had dementia, I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply reached into my purse and placed my phone on the table. But when the recording started playing, the first sentence everyone heard changed everything. And Claire's face went completely white. Have you ever watched someone slowly rewrite the story of who you are? Not with shouting. Not with obvious lies. But with tiny, polite corrections that make everyone else start questioning you. Because that's exactly what Claire had been doing. And the frightening part? I didn't realize how carefully she had been building it until it was almost too late. Let me ask you something. If someone told your family you were forgetting things, would they believe it? Or would they stop and ask questions first? That's what I thought my family would do. But Claire understood something about people that I didn't. If you repeat a small doubt often enough, eventually it starts sounding like the truth. The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off. We were having Sunday lunch at my house. Daniel had come over after church with Claire. We were sitting in the living room talking about a vacation Daniel took when he was 10 years old. I mentioned how he got sunburned on the second day. Claire smiled and said lightly, "Margaret, you already told us that story earlier." The room went quiet for a moment. Daniel chuckled and said, "Mom, you're repeating yourself." I remember blinking at both of them. Because I hadn't told that story earlier. Not that day. But I shrugged it off. People misremember conversations sometimes. It wasn't a big deal. At least, that's what I thought. But then it started happening again. And again. 2 weeks later we were having dinner at Daniel's house. I asked Claire if she had tried the bakery that opened near her office. Before she could answer, she laughed softly and said, "Margaret, you asked me that last week." The way she said it sounded kind. Helpful. But the message underneath was clear. Margaret forgets things. Daniel looked at me with a small frown. And suddenly I felt something strange. Not anger. Embarrassment. Have you ever felt that? When someone corrects you in front of others and you start questioning yourself? That feeling started happening more often. Little comments. Little reminders. Little corrections. But something about the pattern felt off. Because Claire only did it when Daniel was present. Never when we were alone. Not once. And that detail started bothering me. So I began paying closer attention. One afternoon Claire came over while Daniel was at work. We were sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea. We talked for nearly an hour. Not once did she mention my memory. Not once did she correct anything I said. The conversation flowed normally. But that evening when Daniel arrived to pick her up, everything changed. We were talking about Thanksgiving plans. I mentioned inviting my cousin Linda. Claire tilted her head and smiled. Margaret, remember we already talked about that yesterday. I felt the shift immediately. The subtle change in the room. Daniel looked at me. Not accusingly. Just concerned. And in that moment something inside my mind clicked. Claire wasn't correcting mistakes. She was performing. Planting something. Right in front of Daniel. After that day I started keeping notes. Not because I doubted my memory. But because I wanted proof. I bought a small spiral notebook and kept it in my kitchen drawer. Every time Claire made one of those comments, I wrote down the date and what she said. At first I felt ridiculous doing it. But within 3 weeks, I had 6 entries. 6 moments where she told Daniel I had forgotten something that I hadn't. 6. That's when I started asking myself a question that made my stomach twist. Why would someone do this? What could Claire possibly gain from making Daniel believe I was losing my memory? The answer came slowly. And it came in pieces. The first piece arrived during a phone call Daniel made to me one evening. His voice sounded hesitant. Careful. Mom, have you noticed any memory issues lately? I nearly dropped the phone. Memory issues. The phrase sounded clinical. Practiced. Like something someone had told him to say. I asked him where that question was coming from. He hesitated. Then he said something that chilled me. Well. Claire mentioned you've been repeating things lately. Claire mentioned. Not Claire wondered. Not Claire asked. Claire mentioned. Like it was already established fact. That's when I realized something terrifying. Claire had been talking about me when I wasn't there. But even then I didn't understand how far she had taken it. Not until the day my spare car keys disappeared. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I had just come home from the grocery store. I placed the keys on the hallway table. I'm certain of it. That evening when I went to leave the house again. They were gone. I searched everywhere. Kitchen. Bedroom. Purse. Nothing. The next day Claire stopped by unexpectedly. She walked straight into the living room. And within 30 seconds she said, "Oh Margaret, here they are." She picked the keys up from the coffee table. And smiled. See? This is what I was talking about. Talking about. The phrase echoed in my head. I stared at the keys in her hand. Because something felt deeply wrong. I had not left them there. But instead of arguing, I simply nodded. And that night I wrote another entry in my notebook. But the more I paid attention, the more disturbing the pattern became. Because items only went missing after Claire visited. Then magically appeared later. Always when someone else was watching. Always when Daniel was nearby. Little demonstrations. Little proof. Slowly building a narrative. Margaret forgets things. Margaret misplaces things. Margaret repeats herself. Until finally, the biggest step happened. One evening Daniel sat down across from me in my living room. He looked uncomfortable. Like someone about to deliver bad news. "Mom, maybe we should think about seeing a neurologist." "A neurologist? Do you understand what that means?" "That's not casual concern. That's the beginning of something official. Something documented. Something that could lead to doctors' evaluations. Legal decisions. About competence. About independence. About who manages your life." And suddenly I understood something Claire probably thought I would never figure out. If enough people believed I had dementia, they could take control of everything. My finances. My decisions. Even my house. And the worst part? I still didn't have proof. Not yet. But the night before the family dinner, everything changed. Because Claire stepped into my living room to make a phone call. She thought I couldn't hear her. She thought I was busy in the kitchen. And she definitely didn't realize my phone had started recording earlier. At first I only caught a few words. Then I heard her laugh. And she said something that made my hands go completely still. Honestly, convincing Daniel she's losing her memory was easier than I thought. My heart started pounding. I stood there frozen in the kitchen doorway. Listening. Because the next sentence she said explained exactly what she had been planning all along. And it was far worse than I imagined. Have you ever caught someone revealing their real plan when they thought no one was listening? Because that moment can change everything. One sentence. One careless laugh. One slip of the truth. And suddenly the entire story you've been living inside flips upside down. That's exactly what happened in my kitchen that night. I stood there holding a wooden spoon over the roasting pan, pretending to stir vegetables while Claire talked in the living room. She thought she was alone. She thought I couldn't hear her. But the house was quiet, and her voice carried clearly through the hallway. At first I only caught fragments of the conversation. She was speaking to someone on the phone. Her tone was casual. Relaxed. Almost amused. Then she laughed. A sharp little laugh. And she said the sentence that made my stomach drop. Honestly, convincing Daniel she's losing her memory was easier than I thought. The spoon slipped in my hand. I froze. For a moment I wondered if I had misunderstood. Maybe she was joking. Maybe I'd taken the words out of context. But then she kept talking. And every doubt disappeared. "She still thinks everyone trusts her," Claire said. There was a pause while the person on the other end of the call responded. Then Claire spoke again. "Once Daniel believes she can't manage things anymore, we can finally sell the house." "Sell the house?" "My house. The one Robert and I bought nearly 4 decades ago. The house where my son grew up. The house I had spent the last 5 years living in alone after Robert passed away." And Claire was talking about selling it like it was already decided. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Because the recording on my phone was still running on the kitchen counter. Earlier that afternoon I had started recording a video of a recipe to send to my cousin Linda. I had forgotten to stop it. And now that accidental recording was capturing every word Claire said. Claire sighed dramatically. "I swear, if Margaret would just forget where she puts things more often, this would be faster." My fingers tightened around the spoon. Forget where she puts things. So the missing keys hadn't been an accident. They had been part of the plan. Everything suddenly lined up. The comments. The corrections. The misplaced items. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. Have you ever had a moment where everything suddenly makes sense all at once? Where the pieces fall together so perfectly that the truth becomes impossible to ignore? That's what this felt like. Claire continued speaking. "She's sharper than people think," she said. Another pause. Then she lowered her voice slightly. But Daniel's already starting to worry. Once the family starts noticing it too, it's over. Over. That word echoed through my mind. Over for what? Over for my independence? My home? My life? I leaned against the kitchen counter and listened to the rest of the call. Claire talked for another 2 minutes. Every sentence dug the hole deeper. She mentioned how Daniel trusted her judgment. How the family would listen if she framed it as concern. How the house could be sold within months. Then finally she ended the call. I heard her footsteps moving toward the kitchen. In that moment I had exactly 2 choices. I could confront her. Or I could pretend I had heard nothing. Which would you have done? Would you have walked into the living room and demanded answers? Would you have shouted? Accused her? Maybe embarrassed her right there in the kitchen? For a few seconds, I almost did. But then another thought crossed my mind. If I confronted Claire now, she would deny everything. She would claim I misunderstood. She would twist the story. And worst of all, Daniel might believe her. After all, by that point she had already spent months planting doubt about my memory. If I accused her, it might look exactly like the confusion she had been describing. So instead, I did something Claire never expected. I stayed quiet. I turned off the stove. I picked up my phone. And I checked the recording. Every word was there. Clear. Undeniable. Her laugh. Her plan. Her voice saying she had convinced Daniel I was losing my memory. For a moment I just stared at the screen. My hands were shaking slightly. Not with fear. With anger. But also something else. Relief. Because for the first time since all of this began, I had proof. Real proof. And that changed everything. When Claire walked into the kitchen, she smiled like nothing had happened. "Dinner smells great," she said. I looked at her face. The same pleasant expression she always wore. The same polite voice. And I wondered how long she had been planning this. "How was your call?" I asked calmly. "Oh, just my friend Rachel," she replied. "We were talking about work." She didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. The lie came out smoothly. That told me something important. Claire believed she was in complete control of the situation. She believed the story she had built was already strong enough. Strong enough to withstand anything I said. And that's when I realized something. If Claire was willing to manipulate my family behind closed doors, then the best way to expose the truth would be in front of them. All of them. At the same time. Luckily, the opportunity was already coming. The next evening we had a large family dinner planned at my house. Daniel. Claire. My daughter Emily. 2 cousins who were visiting from out of town. Everyone would be there. And Claire had no idea what I had in my purse. The next day I barely slept. Not because I was nervous. Because I was thinking. Planning. Replaying the recording again and again. I asked myself one important question. When should I reveal it? Should I confront her privately first? Should I send the recording to Daniel? Or should I wait? By the time evening arrived, I had made my decision. Sometimes the truth is most powerful when everyone hears it at once. So I waited. Dinner began normally. People laughed. Plates passed around the table. Claire acted exactly as she always did. Warm. Charming. Helpful. But halfway through dinner, Claire suddenly stood up. And when she cleared her throat, the room went silent. Because the next words she spoke were the same accusation she had been quietly building for months. "Everyone, we need to talk about Margaret." And in that moment, I realized Claire was about to make her move. Have you ever felt a room change in a single second? Not gradually. Not slowly. Just, shift. Like the air suddenly got heavier. That's what happened the moment Claire said those words. Everyone, we need to talk about Margaret. The fork in my hand paused halfway to my plate. Around the table, people looked up. My son Daniel stopped chewing. My daughter Emily leaned back slightly in her chair. Even my cousin Linda put her glass down. No one spoke. Claire stood at the end of the table with her hands resting lightly on the chair in front of her. Her face looked concerned. Soft. Careful. If you didn't know better, you would think she was about to deliver difficult news about someone she loved. But I knew better. Because in my purse, only a few feet away, sat the recording of the truth. Claire sighed gently. I didn't want to bring this up tonight, she said. Her voice carried that same polished tone she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable. But I think we all need to talk about what's been happening with Margaret. The room grew even quieter. Have you ever noticed how powerful silence can be? When someone frames a situation as serious, people instinctively listen. Claire continued. Over the past few months, I've noticed some changes. She glanced toward Daniel briefly. He nodded slowly, encouraging her to continue. That tiny gesture told me something important. He had already heard this conversation before. Just not in front of everyone. Claire folded her hands. Margaret has been forgetting things, she said gently. The word forgetting seemed to hang in the air. No one interrupted her. No one questioned her. She took that silence as permission to continue. She repeats stories, Claire added. She asks the same questions several times in a day. I sat perfectly still. Watching. Listening. Because something interesting happens when someone believes they are winning. They get confident. And confidence makes people careless. Claire walked slowly around the table, speaking like she was presenting a case. Just last week she misplaced her car keys and couldn't remember where she left them, she said. She glanced toward Daniel again. And there have been other moments too. Moments. Such a harmless word. But every example she listed had been carefully staged. The missing keys. The repeated stories. The little corrections. Now she was presenting them like medical evidence. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Claire, what are you saying? She asked. Claire hesitated, as if the next words were difficult for her to say. But I could see it. The performance. I think Margaret may be experiencing early signs of dementia. The word landed like a stone dropped into water. Dementia. The table fell completely silent. Daniel rubbed his hands together nervously. Emily stared at me. My cousins looked confused. And Claire looked sympathetic. Have you ever seen someone pretend to be concerned about a problem they created? Because that's exactly what was happening. Claire continued carefully. I'm not saying anything for certain, she added. But I think it might be time to consider having a doctor evaluate her memory. Evaluate her memory. The phrase sounded clinical. Professional. Reasonable. Which made it incredibly dangerous. Because accusations wrapped in concern are much harder to challenge. Claire turned toward Daniel. I just want to make sure Margaret is safe, she said. Daniel nodded slowly. I've noticed some things too, he admitted quietly. Hearing that hurt more than I expected. Not because Daniel was cruel. But because he trusted his wife. And she had spent months shaping what he believed. Claire continued. If Margaret is having trouble managing things, we might need to start helping her with finances, or decisions around the house. There it was. The real objective. Not concern. Control. The room remained silent. No one seemed to know what to say. And Claire mistook that silence for agreement. She took a small breath. I know this is hard, she said. But pretending nothing is wrong would be irresponsible. That sentence almost made me smile. Pretending nothing is wrong. The irony was breathtaking. Because something was wrong. Just not what Claire thought. I looked around the table slowly. Every face watching me. Waiting for my reaction. Waiting for the confused old woman to defend herself. Let me ask you something. If you were in that moment, what would you do? Would you argue? Would you shout? Would you demand everyone listen? I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I calmly placed my napkin beside my plate. I reached down and opened my purse. The movement caught Claire's attention immediately. Her eyes followed my hand. I removed my phone and set it gently on the table. The small sound of it touching the wood echoed in the quiet room. "What's that?" Emily asked softly. I looked at Claire. She was watching me carefully now. Something in her expression had changed. Just slightly. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. I folded my hands. And spoke for the first time since Claire began her speech. "My memory may not be as bad as you think," I said calmly. Claire blinked. Daniel frowned slightly. Emily leaned forward. Then I slid the phone toward the center of the table. "I recorded something last night," I continued. Claire's face stiffened. Just a little. And I asked a simple question. One that made the entire room lean closer. Would anyone like to hear what Claire said when she thought no one was listening? The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. Daniel looked at Claire. Claire looked at me. And in that moment, for the first time all evening, her confidence disappeared. Because she knew exactly what might be on that phone. But none of the others did. Not yet. And when the recording started playing, the first sentence Claire's voice spoke made the entire table freeze. "What would you do if the lie you built for months suddenly started collapsing in front of everyone? Not slowly. Not privately. But all at once. Right there at the dinner table." Because that's exactly what happened when I pressed play. The phone speaker wasn't very loud. Just loud enough for the people sitting closest to hear clearly. But in a silent room, that was more than enough. At first there was only the faint background noise of my kitchen. The sound of a cabinet door closing. A chair moving. Then Claire's voice came through the speaker. Clear. Unmistakable. Honestly, convincing Daniel she's losing her memory was easier than I thought. The reaction was immediate. Emily's head snapped toward Claire. My cousin Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Daniel froze. Completely still. Across the table, Claire's face drained of color so quickly it was almost shocking. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The recording continued. "I swear, if Margaret would just forget where she puts things more often, this would be faster." Every eye in the room moved between the phone and Claire. No one spoke. No one interrupted. They were listening. And the truth was speaking for itself. Claire's voice laughed softly through the speaker. "Once Daniel believes she can't manage things anymore, we can finally sell the house." "The house? My house?" Daniel's eyes slowly widened. He looked at Claire. Then back at the phone. Then back at Claire again. But the recording wasn't finished yet. Claire's voice continued. "She still thinks everyone trusts her." Another laugh. "But Daniel's already starting to worry. Once the family notices it too, it's over." Over. The word echoed through the room like a gunshot. Emily pushed her chair back slightly. "Claire, what is this?" she demanded. But the recording kept playing. And the final line was the one that truly destroyed everything. "She's sharper than people think, but convincing them she has dementia is working." The audio ended. Silence.